June 1215, King John of England signed a document which would be the first to put into writing the principle that the king and his government were not above the law. It sought to prevent the king from exploiting his power and placed limits of royal authority by establishing law as a power in itself. The document was the Magna Carta, and its subsequent versions would become an inspiration to several constitutions across the modern world. Welcome to the Why in History. I am Ajay Kaul, and today we look at democracy, its origins, and how it evolved across the globe. The Magna Carta was reissued with alterations in 1216, 1217, and 1225. But it laid the foundation for lasting legal concepts like the ban on cruel and unusual punishments, and trial by a jury of one's peers, and the idea that justice should not be sold or unnecessarily delayed. In 1776, rebellious American colonists looked at the Magna Carta as a model for their demands of liberty from the British Crown on the eve of the American Revolution. Its legacy is evident in the Bill of Rights, and specifically in the Fifth Amendment, which echoes Clause 39, "Nor shall any persons be deprived of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law." Incidentally, the first formal blueprint for a modern democracy was the Constitution of the United States of America, adopted in 1788. The first president, George Washington, was elected unopposed in 1789 and again for a second term in 1792. But by 1796, political parties came into existence, and the two primary ones were the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. The 1796 election saw John Adams, who was a Federalist, become president, and a Democratic Republican, Thomas Jefferson, become vice president. In 1800, a very closely contested presidential race was awarded to Thomas Jefferson by Congress, and this easy transfer of presidential power between political parties proved conclusively that the American Republic had pioneered a very successful working democracy. And this was very different from the violent upheavals of the French politics or the corruption of the unreformed British model. The 1780s were marked by development of social movements, identifying themselves with the term democracy. In Europe, in Benelux countries, that is Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg, there were political clashes between aristocrats and democrats. And slowly, the semi-negative meaning of the word democracy in Europe, which was until then regarded as synonymous with anarchy, changed into the opposite of aristocracy. So democracy was now more about the people than about anarchy. And new constitutions explicitly described and limited the authority of power holders. And as time progressed, the social movements around democracy slowly started operating at a bigger scale, leading to revolutions happening at the country level, where autocrats and monarchies started getting overthrown. And one of the very first and extremely unique revolution was the 1791 Haitian Revolution, the first and the only successful slave revolution which established the Free Republic of Haiti. The revolt began in August of 1791 and ended in 1804 with the independence of Haiti from French colonial rule. Many European powers ostracized Haiti, fearing the spread of slave revolts in their regions. But the reaction in the United States was mixed. Slave-owning states did all they could to suppress the news of the rebellion, but merchants in the free states hoped to trade with Haiti rather than with the European powers. And around this time also occurred the mother of them all, the French Revolution from 1789 to 1799. This was a pivotal period in the history of French, European, and Western civilization. And during this time, the Republic replaced the absolute monarchy in France, and the country's Roman Catholic Church was forced to undergo a radical restructuring. Though France oscillated between republic, empire, and monarchy for 75 years after the First Republic fell to a coup d'etat, the revolution is widely seen as a major turning point in the history of Western democracy. The age of absolutism and aristocracy was replaced by the age of citizenry as the dominant political force. The slogan of the French Revolution was Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, ou la mort, that is, liberty, equality, fraternity, or death. The slogan outlived the revolution, later becoming the rallying cry of activists, both militant and non-violent, across the globe for the promotion of democracy or overthrow of oppressive governments. The new political ideologies that had emerged from the backdrop of the French Revolution coalesced in 1848. That year, across all of Europe, there were a series of revolutions that combined the liberal, socialist, and nationalist movements in a temporary alliance against the monarchy and the conservative order. The revolutions once again started in France, but quickly spread to Prussia, Austria, the smaller German kingdoms, and regions like Italy and Hungary. Out of these rose coalitions, which temporarily succeeded in either running their monarchs out of the capital cities, as in Paris, or forcing their monarchs to agree to constitutions and rationalize legal systems, as in Prussia and Austria. Wait, I said temporarily succeeded. What does that mean? Well, let's hold that thought for a bit. I will get to it shortly. So in February of 1848 in France, the unpopular king Louis Philippe tried to crack down on a gathering of reformers. Subsequently, a revolutionary crowd gathered and began to build barricades to fight back soldiers who had fired upon them. The king promptly fled the city, and a diverse group of liberals and socialists formed a provisional government. France was declared a new republic, and plans were drawn up for a general election for representatives to a new government. Democracy made its inroads, and never again would a monarch hold the throne of France simply because of their dynastic birth. So we are in the 19th century, and technology has started making its presence felt within society. So in Austria, crowds took to the streets of Vienna after learning of the revolution in Paris. How? Via telegraph. So it was the 19th century's version of social media that spread the word across Europe. Peasants marched into the capital demanding the end of feudalism. Workers demanded better wages and conditions, and liberals demanded a constitution. In Prussia and other German kingdoms, a series of revolutions saw a gathering of hundreds of would-be politicians in the city of Frankfurt. The first popularly elected National Assembly in German history gathered to draw up a constitution based on the principle of German unity and a liberalized legal order. And as I mentioned before, the change was very short-lived. The coalitions were great at demanding an end to the status quo, but when it came to bringing together the citizens, the coalition members found it a lot more challenging. And it was even more difficult to agree on major political issues around the creation of a new government. The first place of dissent was France again, where the alliance between the liberals and the socialists broke down. And this led to protests in the streets and finally a collapse of the coalition. And in the midst of all the chaos, Napoleon Bonaparte's nephew, Louis Napoleon, successfully ran for president of the Republic, posing as a unifying force above the petty politics. In 1852, however, he staged a coup and declared himself Emperor of France under the title Napoleon III. So in a few short years, the experiment in democratic politics in France ended with a popular dictator, Napoleon III, taking over. Ultimately, across Europe, all of these revolutions failed. In fact, a prominent historian noted that 1848 was the year that European history reached its turning point and failed to turn. But that is not completely true, because even though many monarchs returned to power, the constitutional and parliamentary reforms that had been initiated did stay. The concept of a parliament and elected representative bodies became the norm across Europe towards the latter half of the century. Monarchies also accepted the need for a written constitution. Another major milestone in the 19th century was the introduction of the secret ballot, which was introduced in the 1850s in Australia. Prior to the concept of the secret ballot, it was argued that no man would want to keep his vote secret unless he was ashamed of it. The two earliest systems were the Victorian method and the South Australian method. Both were introduced in 1856 to voters in Victoria and South Australia respectively. The Victorian method involved voters crossing out all the candidates they did not approve of, whereas the South Australian method, which is very similar to what we practice today, had voters mark only the preferred candidate. At the beginning of the 20th century, after the end of the First World War, Europe had a temporary victory with respect to democracy. Democracy was still intact in France and was temporarily extended to Germany. In 1906, full modern democratic rights, which included universal suffrage for all citizens, was implemented constitutionally in Finland, including proportional representation. Even Russia had a brief tryst with democracy in 1917 after the February Revolution, till Lenin took over in October following his October coup. One of the key factors that led to the promotion of democracy, especially in the early 20th century, was the growth of the middle class following the Industrial Revolution. As the middle class became economically more powerful, suppression of the common citizens via an autocratic regime was no longer an option. Just as economic prosperity was the key factor in the promotion and growth of democracy, economic hardship was a key factor in the death of democracy. And one of the stark examples of this is the growth of Adolf Hitler post Germany's defeat in World War I. And compounding that with the Great Depression of 1929, Hitler came to power with the promise of delivering a more prosperous Germany. Just like America voted for a new political leader in FDR to get them out of the Great Depression, Germany too looked upon Hitler to get them out of the Great Depression. The stark difference, though, was that even though Hitler was technically elected democratically, he manipulated the democratic setup to make sure the various branches of government became subservient to him. In a sense, he became a democratically elected dictator. With the defeat of Germany in World War II, though, democracy in Western Europe witnessed a resurgence. Representative governments were established that reflected the general will of their citizens. However, many countries of Central and Eastern Europe became satellite states of the Soviet Union and ended up being part of the general communist dictatorship. Japan, too, adopted a new constitution during the post-war Allied occupation with initial elections in the year 1946. World War II also drained the coffers of the colonial powers in Europe, and subsequently the anti-colonial sentiment strengthened, and this led to a lot of the colonies gaining independence from their Western colonial powers. In 1946, the United States granted independence to the Philippines, which became a presidential republic until the presidency of Ferdinand Marcos. After World War II, the United Nations partitioned the British Mandate into two states, one Jewish and one Arab, and on 14th of May 1948, the State of Israel declared independence, and thus the first full democracy in the Middle East came into existence. Israel has been a representative democracy since, with a parliamentary system and universal suffrage. India became a democratic republic in 1950 after achieving independence from Great Britain in 1947. The first national elections were held in 1952, and that gave India the status of the world's largest liberal democracy with universal suffrage, which it continues to hold today. Most of the former British and French colonies gained independence by 1965. At the beginning of the 20th century, there was not even a single liberal democracy with universal suffrage. But by the year 2000, 120 out of 192 nations of the world were such democracies. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, most of its satellite states chose independence and subsequently became democratic. And all of a sudden, there was general enthusiasm and hope that the world overall would become more democratic. Communism, socialism, dictatorships had failed, and democracy and capitalism were the way to go. But of late, across many countries of the world, democracies seem to have evolved into democratic dictatorships. What this means is you have a leader who's democratically elected, and he or she begins to figure out subtle loopholes in the system and gradually replaces the different wings of the government with loyalists, and also controls the media with respect to what can be published and what needs to be censored. And one of the best examples of this? No, it's not Vladimir Putin. It is Hungary's Viktor Orban. Viktor Orban was the Prime Minister of Hungary from 1998 to 2002. He lost his re-election bid, but subsequently in 2010, he came back to power, and this time he had made up his mind that he was not going to lose again. So he started by redrawing the electoral map so it could be tilted in his favor. And then he set a retirement age for the justices so that he could replace them with his preferred candidates. And then he regulated the media in such a way that a positive coverage of him was guaranteed. So essentially, you have a democratically elected leader ruling over a democracy like an authoritarian. And when you look beyond Hungary, you will see a lot more examples of this group of leaders. And it is on this note that we end this section of the program. On to the quiz section. Question from the previous episode. What denomination US dollar bill is most in circulation? Based on the 2018 data, with $13.4 billion in circulation, the $100 bill is most in circulation. So the answer is D, the $100 bill. Question for the current episode. Based on the Economist Intelligence Unit's Democracy Index for the year 2021, which country is the most democratic and which one is the least democratic? Is it A, New Zealand and North Korea, meaning New Zealand being the most democratic and North Korea being the least democratic? Is it B, Finland and Cambodia, C, Norway and Afghanistan, or D, Sweden and Myanmar? Once again, based on the Economist Intelligence Unit's Democracy Index of the year 2021, which country is the most democratic and which one is the least? Is it A, New Zealand and North Korea, B, Finland and Cambodia, C, Norway and Afghanistan, or D, Sweden and Myanmar? The answer will be provided in the next episode. That's all we have in today's episode. In the next episode, we take a close look at Taiwan, its history, and its relationship with China, and what the controversy is all about. Till then, stay safe and keep looking for the why in history.